Hello, I'm Amanda Moore. I'm the director of the Clearinghouse Community. Welcome to the Advocacy Exchange for September 2018. The Advocacy Exchange is our monthly conversation with advocates advancing change. Both the Advocacy Exchange and the Clearinghouse Community are brought to you by the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, a national leader in advancing justice and opportunity. Today, I'm joined by two guests from Community Legal Services of Philadelphia, Nate Vogel and Michael Hollander. Nate is the Director of Law and Technology at Community Legal Services. Hello, Nate. And Michael Hollander is just this week ending his 10-year tenure, nice tongue twister, as supervising attorney at CLS. Hi, Michael.
Hey, how are you, Amanda?
Doing fine. They are joining me today from Philadelphia. So Nate and Michael wrote our current article on the Clearinghouse. It's called The Witness in Your Pocket. It can be found on the Clearinghouse community at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. The article examines an innovative strategy to find evidence for victims in wage theft cases using the automatic location tracking data on a worker's cell phone. We're going to talk about that today with Nate and Michael, but first I want to tell you how you can be part of the conversation. Most of you are watching this through the live stream on the Shriver Center's YouTube channel, and you'll see there on the right, if you're on a desktop or laptop, there's a live chat box. You can submit your questions and comments to us there. I think if you're on a mobile device, you'll find the live chat at the bottom of the screen. If you want to go ahead and try it, see if it works for you, go ahead. You can send us your name and where you're watching. We've had a lot of people already do that. I'll say hello to a few of you. We have Omid in Philly, Edward in Austin, Jack in Maine, Amanda in Nebraska, Sarah's in New Jersey, and Emmanuel's in Richmond, Virginia. So thank you for joining us today and letting us hear from you. If live chat isn't your thing, that's okay. You can also email me your questions or comments. You can reach me at amanda.moore, M-O-O-R-E, at povertylaw.org. Today's conversation is being recorded, and everyone who registered for today's program will get an email early next week with a link to watch the recording. There will also be a link to Michael and Nate's article, as well as a link to register for next month's Advocacy Exchange. But now let's start talking about cell phone data and wage theft cases. Michael, I'll start with you. So we're talking about wage theft for low income or for low wage workers. So that's when those workers have not been paid for all the hours that they have worked. Can you briefly tell us the evidence problem that these workers often have when trying to claim their wages?
Sure. So there's not a wage and hour attorney out there who hasn't experienced the problem that lots of workers who are owed money don't have a good accounting of the hours that they worked. So they might have worked off the clock, which means that they had a shift, they clocked in, they clocked out, and then they were asked to work after they clocked out for 20 minutes or half an hour. Maybe they had to come in on a Saturday and they weren't clocking in. Or many workers, this is probably the clients that I've had, they actually just don't have any records of their hours at all. They work days a week, they never schedule, they're told to work, and they get paid at the end of the week. And when they come to me or they come to any attorney who's doing wage cases, they'll say, you know, this is how many hours they worked. But when you go to court, you have to have some sort of proof of the number of hours. And obviously the best proof would be something like a time clock printout, if that's going to be accurate. But for workers who don't have anything, you have to figure out how to construct some sort of evidence to give to the judge. A Supreme Court case from the 40s that allows workers to just testify on their own or give any other credible evidence of their hours. But of course, if you're just testifying about your hours, you're subject to credibility issues. And you're also subject to memory issues, right? If somebody's been working somewhere for a year or 2 years and they haven't been paid, it's hard for that person to remember exactly how many hours they worked every single week, especially if their hours fluctuate a lot, which might happen in, say, the construction industry, where you might not work on a rainy day and you might work extra hours during the summer or other nice days. And you just have to figure out a way to go back and reconstruct somebody's schedule using memory or whatever other tools you might have.
Great, thank you. Nate, I'll turn to you with the big question. How is it that cell phone location data could help with this problem?
Yeah, so as Mike explained, the problem is that it's really difficult to prove where and when a worker was at the job site. Well, it turns out that smartphones in particular collect pretty detailed information over a long period of time of geographic coordinates, where a person was, and what we stream of data that you have been inadvertently collecting over how long, if you had your cell phone, for over the course of years. And you can parse that data and come up with a pretty convincing record of where a person was when they were there. And you can use that to say, well, this person's smartphone was at the job site between the hours of 9 and 8 p.m. on the following days. And you can then say, well, probably they had their phone with them. And so that's like a pretty good argument that the person was at the job site when they said they were at the job site.
Got it. So Nate, we had a question that came in before the broadcast today from Shelley in Yakima, Washington. And she asked, how long do location data stay in a phone and how can they be extracted?
Data in a bunch of different ways. And this was something that was kind of surprising to us as we got deeper into this issue. A cell phone connects with cell towers. A cell phone connects with Wi-Fi, local Wi-Fi routers. A cell phone might also have a GPS chip in it that uses satellites around the Earth to come up with pretty accurate geographical coordinates. Cell phones record all this information. They don't necessarily actually store it. What happens is that the operating system of the smartphone stores data, records all of this, and then saves it on a server somewhere. Smartphones, Android smartphones, Google ends up recording a lot of this data. It's not on your smartphone, actually. It's in Google servers, in the cloud, wherever they keep their data. They could keep it. We haven't found any kind of time limit around how long they collect this data. So to take an example, I got my Google cell phone 5 years ago. And so now I can go to my Google account information and look up my location history. And Google has the full location history for all 5 years that I've had, actually several different smartphones. It's connected. The data lives in the cloud. It lives with third-party entities, and it can be stored for really indefinitely, as far as we can tell.
And like, putting aside the creepy part of it, that you're being tracked, for the purpose of using this for wage cases, the good thing is that this is all tied to your Google account. It's not tied to your cell phone. And Nate mentioned this, but that means that you can get a new phone and get another new phone and get another new phone. And as long as you're always logging into those phones with your original Google account, with the same Google account every time, then all of your data will be stored. What wouldn't work, and I know that this happens with some workers, is they don't really use their Google account for anything. The person will only have their data for as long as that account exists and they can log into it. So for most people, though, that means that your data could go back easily for years. I mean, mine goes back 5 or 7 years or something. It's kind of crazy what you can find about yourself.
Yeah. And then in terms of extracting it from a phone, so you typically wouldn't extract it from the phone itself. You go to whatever third party is and get the data from the third party. Google, to its credit, makes it very easy to get your own location data from your account. You go to the URL is in the article. Account as a text file, and it can be a really big text file, but it's pretty easy to do.
Nate, are you still there?
Oh, yes.
Okay, yes, you're there. It's been breaking up a little bit. Overall, we can still hear what you're saying, for sure. It just sometimes is cutting out. Maybe I don't really know how to fix that. See, I don't have that tech knowledge for this. we can ask Google. So describe to us then, what these data are, how they're on the phone. Tell us, concretely, let's bring it down to a particular case. How might this be able to be used in an actual case in court?
Yeah, so I've been using this myself for a little over a year, and I've used it in, I don't know, 5 or 6 cases where I've actually been able to do something actionable with the data that I have. So I should say that there's a lot of people that will come in and they don't have location services turned on. Some people, I should say, don't have it turned on, or they have an iPhone. iPhones are harder to get the data, or they have the location data turned on, but it's just not useful, maybe because the person's job involves moving around a lot. So like a cab driver, for example, wouldn't be a good candidate to use this. But if somebody came into me and they told me that they had been working at a place for 50 or 60 hours a week, and they had been paid a flat rate of $500 a week or something, I would go through my case the way I would go through any case, which is just asking all the normal questions about the person's job, their hours, their duties, who's supervising them. But then after we talk about what their hours and their schedule generally is, I'll then ask them if they have a cell phone, and if they mind if I use it. I'll look at their cell phone and go to Google Maps and to the timeline feature on Google Maps to see if they have been tracking themselves. And if they have been tracking themselves, then I'll explain to them how this tool works and ask them if they mind if we download data. And so far, nobody has said no. Everyone has been fine with us downloading data and looking at their location information. And then usually with the person sitting there, we'll log into their account on my computer, download their data, run it through the program, highlight the places where they worked, and then look at the spreadsheet together that gets generated. And so what happens is all your location data goes into our program. It shows you a map of all of the places where you've been, and then you could put a box around where you worked. And then when you hit go, it tells you what your work schedule was at that box, basically. When did you come and when did you go every single day over the course of whatever time period your cell phone data is from. And the reason I look at it with them is for 2 reasons. One is, first, I want to make sure that the data generally is consistent with what they told me. So if I'm told that somebody worked about 50 hours a week, I want to look at their data and see, does this data also show that they worked about 50 hours a week? If it doesn't, then there's a problem either with the person's story or with the cell phone information for some reason. And then the second thing is there's going to be anomalous weeks. There's going to be weeks where it looks like the person didn't work at all. And there's going to be weeks where it looks like the person worked an extraordinary amount. And you want to catch those anomalous weeks early on in the process to figure out why they're anomalous. So to give an example from a case that I did about a year ago, this individual worked at a giant school building, an old school that it was being converted into condos, and he had a whole month where it looked like he barely worked, even though he worked 48 to 50 hours every other week. When I asked him about that month, I said, "What happened in February? How come it looks like you barely worked?" He thought about it and he said, "Oh, you know what? In February, I was working in the basement, and I was in the building. He didn't actually have any cell phone coverage. There was no Wi-Fi because it was a building under construction. He couldn't get GPS because he was in a basement. So as far as his phone was concerned, it had no idea where he was, and it didn't look like he was at his work site. And so it showed very little data. On the other end of things, you could find a week where I had another client who had a week where she worked 120 hours in 1 week, which didn't make sense to me. That's almost working consistently for 6 straight days. And what it turned out was that was a week that her employer had gone on vacation, and she was asked to house sit for her employer. And so she stayed at the employer's house for the entire week. And so we were able to sort of go through and figure out all those pieces, because if at some point you do need to present this in court, you are going to need to have an answer for all of these anomalous weeks. You need to be able to explain them in one way or the other. I forgot my cell phone at home, my battery died sometimes, I worked in the basement, I slept over at my employer's house for several days, something like that. The other piece of this, and then obviously if you get to court, you'd introduce this, which I will say that I haven't had to introduce this in court yet, because in the few cases that I've been able to actually work with an employer when I've had cell phone data, I will tell them when I write my initial letter to them, this is how much I think that you owe my client. And the reason I think that is because I have looked at their cell phone location data. And the reason I do that is because I don't want to hide the ball. I want to say I have this very strong proof of my client's hours, and you're going to have a hard time fighting against me. I have one case right now that I'm passing off to my colleagues as I leave, where the employer doesn't necessarily dispute my client's hours, he just disputes the way my client was in that case, because the dispute isn't about how much my client worked, but whether he was paid correctly.
Thank you. I'll remind our viewers that we'd like to hear from you. What are your questions for Michael and Nate about this? You can submit those through the live chat on YouTube, or you can email me at amandamoore, M-O-O-R-E, at povertylaw.org. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the idea itself, because it seems very innovative to me. And so I'm wondering, Michael, I'll stick with you. How did this idea begin to even think about looking at a person's cell phone data as proof of where they were and how long they were working?
Yeah, I want the majority of the time I've been doing wage and hour law, I've been trying to think about this question of how can we develop better data for our clients. Testimony is great, but it's always better if you have something that's more than testimony and certainly more objective than testimony. I think every lawyer out there has done this. You give your clients little pocket calendars that they can fill in every day at work, or some other form that they can fill in. You tell them to keep track of their hours in a notebook. The problem is anything that you give your client before they have a problem, they need to be proactive about doing that and doing it consistently. Because even if they're really good and they're like, okay, I'm going to track my hours for this job, if they're not tracking their hours for the job every day, then whatever tool they were using, whether it was pen and paper or the Department of Labor's app that lets you track your hours, it's not going to be something that is valuable. It's not going to have a full set of information about their hours. So the question that I've been asking myself for a long time is, what other information can we get? And we've looked at client text messages. We've looked at all sorts of other things, maybe a diary, or is there another person who knows this person's comings and goings? And over the course of the past few years, I've played around with some of Google's tools where they have a timeline feature and they show it to you, or they can show you, you can look at any day of any year that you've been tracked and see where you were. And at some point, these two questions, or these two things that I was looking at, clicked together. This idea that we're trying to figure out something that's passively tracking our clients and is creating objective data, and the idea that Google is figure, and then it started exploring whether or not the data that Google has, whether that would be something that we could then use in a way to figure out where a client was. And so it sort of was a thing that over time, it's an issue I've been working on for a long time in my head. And the right tool just came around at some point that I figured out how to use it.
Okay, so it's one thing to have the data on the phone or in the cloud, not on the phone itself, but it's another to have something that produces this usable log. So Nate, I'll turn to you. How did you develop this website that will help advocates do just that?
So University of Pennsylvania's engineering school, it's a group of engineering students called Hack for Impact. And they work with nonprofits to develop various kinds of technical solutions to problems that they think are interesting and impactful. And we worked with them to explain what we were looking for, what the goal of the project was, how we wanted the software tool to be used. And they took that project and they came back in several months with really a pretty amazing website. They developed this application, which if folks have seen it already, that's awesome. If you haven't, please go check it out. One of the really neat things about what they developed is that the code all runs in your browser. So the data that you're uploading doesn't actually get uploaded anywhere. It doesn't leave your computer, which for us was a huge privacy win. We're not worried that the location data is going to get hacked out of a cloud storage database or something like that. Once you go to the website and you use it, the data stays with you. And so that was one of the really amazing features that they were able to put together. And I'll just say, like, working with the group of
Nate, I think we're cutting out again.
Oh,
there you are. Okay, could you repeat the last thing you said about working with the students? I'm still having trouble hearing you. So I'm going to repeat for our viewers that we would like to hear from you. I'm sure they'll get the signal back quickly. You can submit a question via live chat. If we don't get to it today in time, I will pass that along to Nate and Michael, and we will send you an email response to it. You can also email me, Amanda Moore, MOORE, at povertylaw.org. All right, I'm going to see how how everyone is. Nate, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear
I
me?
hear you. Yes, I hear you. So can you repeat what you said about working with the students?
Just that there are groups out there like Hack for Impact that are great to work for. They have a lot of technical expertise, and they're looking for advocates who have substantive expertise who can articulate problems for them that they can then write the code to solve.
Got it. So we did have a question come in from Molly in New Mexico, and she notes that this is pretty daunting. And she was asking about if, basically, I think, Molly, we just answered your question, if there was an app for it to track this sort of thing, or if it's going to the website. And I think we've just answered those questions. If not, please send a follow-up to clarify if there's something you need more information on. So Nate mentioned the site, so it's available now for folks to use. The link is in their article, which you can find at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse, and we'll include it again in the follow-up email that you'll get early next week. Do you have further plans for the site, Nate, or is it in its final form right now?
I think what we're really interested in, as Mike said, he's used this in the site and the data in a handful of cases. But I think we're in early days in terms of understanding how to use this information effectively, what sort of pitfalls there are. We have done some thinking about the evidentiary issues, the discovery issues, the testimony issues, once you actually get into court with the information. But there's a lot more for us to learn. I think the tool is probably in a pretty good shape. But what we're really interested in hearing about is from other advocates who start to use it, what your experiences are there interface changes that would be helpful, what other sorts of documentation would be helpful that we could provide on the site that would make it easier to use the information and more palatable to judges who may see a text file of location coordinates and not know what to do with it. So I think we're looking for that kind of feedback to continue to improve it.
Great. And I will note that in the article, they do explore this question of, how could this actually be introduced in court, and look at some of the rules of evidence. There's a thoughtful discussion of the likely pathways for that and maybe some of the challenges that you might meet. So that's worth checking out. Michael, you mentioned earlier that so far all your clients have said, yes, we can pull this data. So it sounds like you've had a pretty positive reaction from clients so far. And you mentioned that when you have used this with opposing counsel, that none of those cases have made it to court. So I'm curious what the reaction is to this that you've heard from employers or from their attorneys.
Yeah, interestingly enough, in none of the cases that I told the opposing counsel or employer that we have location data from a cell phone did they comment on that fact. So they were willing to settle the cases, and I think we got great settlements in those cases, and much better than they would have been had I not had the data, and not even necessarily because the data was so powerful in terms of using it for a settlement tool, but more because it allowed me to understand much better how much our clients were owed. So sometimes you hear stories from clients that seem unreasonable, that they worked 100 hours in a week or something. And if they're giving you your cell phone data and you can actually say, okay, I believe that you worked 100 hours 2 of those weeks in the last 6 months, then you can actually ask for that money without having to worry about what that's going to look like if that comes back to you during a court case or something. So no one's ever commented to me on it. I have gotten a comment from plaintiff's counsel once before to say, what's going to happen when employers start using your tool? And I think it's a good question. And my answer is partly this information's always been out there. It's just that we're figuring out a way to use it. So it would surprise me if well-funded defense counsel hasn't figured this out already or isn't already going to do something like this soon. And the other part of it is we all want to get to the truth in the end, right? So we want to make sure that we're winning for our clients what they're owed. We're not trying to trump cases up. We're not trying to make cases seem like they're worth more than they are. So if our client's cell phone data doesn't support what we're saying, either we have to have a very good reason for that. They're not bringing their cell phone to work, or they're in a city in
Michael, you're breaking up. We have a question that came in. I think we got what you were going to say, that regardless, we're after the truth. So if it doesn't match up, we have to figure out why that is. But we had a question come in from Matt, and Matt works with farm workers in Colorado. And his question is about the precision of the location data. And this is something you address in your article as some, saying that this is not going to work in every single case. But here's a specific question addressed. He says, for example, if a worker lives near the job site, is the data going to work, or are the data going to work, or is that going to be off? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, the precision can vary pretty dramatically. So as we said, the data is collected from Wi-Fi signals, from GPS signals, and from cell phone, telephone signals. And it can vary by meters, it can vary by hundreds of meters. Each coordinate comes with an estimate of the accuracy of the coordinate that they think you're at. And so you can see how accurate they think your location information is. But it is very true that the accuracy of the information varies pretty widely. If you live near the job site, and if it's a city where signals can bounce around buildings, then you may have trouble, for sure.
Right. I had a client, for example, who worked in a shop and lived above the shop, and we just couldn't use the website for him because there was no way to pick out when he was working and when he wasn't working. For a farm worker, though, who is maybe living at a labor camp, and then they're working in a field even half a mile away, that could be far enough away that it would be fine. Half a mile is a very long distance. It sort of depends on what their phone's able to pick up. If it could pick up a GPS signal and it's regularly doing that, half a mile would be very easy to pick those points apart, and I would rely on that. If they're working, right next door to where they live, or if there's a lot of mountains or something around and you don't get good GPS signals and you're relying on a cell tower and there's only one in the neighborhood, maybe it's not going to be as accurate. So sometimes you just have to look through what your client has and see if, again, like I said, you want to look to see if the data that you're getting from their phone is consistent with their story. And if it's not, maybe it's because it's picking something else up, like where they slept instead of just where they worked.
And the website is designed to accommodate that in a way. So when you upload your data and you start to draw boxes around your work sites, it probably makes sense. You might try drawing boxes a couple of different times in order to handle that inaccuracies that might come up, so that you see the picture and time out of the work site. Your boxes may be bigger in more rural areas and smaller in urban areas, or the reverse. But you can try it different ways.
Thank you. We are nearing the end of our time, but we did get a comment and a question from Molly. The comment, this could be really helpful in the farm worker context, where workers are required to show up early to a field but have to wait 1 to 2 hours before actually picking. This would allow counting the wait time. So it's a great comment, Molly. Thank you. And then her question is more about the technology involved. My farm worker clients have very basic smartphones or not so smartphones. Can you still get data from those?
It's a great question. I think it depends on their phone, and you'd sort of have to you'd have to go into their phone or go into their Google account and see what's being collected, because it depends on how not smart their phone is. I think really cheap smartphones are still great and they would work. The question is if you have something that's more of a feature phone, whether it would work. Another thing that could be helpful in the farm worker context, just to put this out there since we're talking about that, is often clients don't necessarily know exactly where they worked. They just know that they were brought to a field or they had to go to a field, but they couldn't identify an address. And one of the things that the tool does that's really helpful is when you upload somebody's location data, it makes essentially like a heat map. It shows you all of the places you've been and how many times you've been there. And so you can look for the places where you were more frequently, especially if you're in a rural area, and say, okay, here's this field in the middle of nowhere, and I seem to have a lot of location points showing up at that field. That must have been one of the places that I went to work. And it allows you to select multiple places as your work site. So one worker can have 3, 4, 5, or even 10 work sites, and the tool will combine them all together into the same spreadsheet if you highlight them all.
Great, thank you. Well, we have reached the end of our time. I know we could talk about this for much longer. It's really interesting to me. I want to thank everyone who tuned in today. Thank you, Michael and Nate, for sharing your thoughts and this really innovative tool with us. I want to remind our viewers that you can read Michael and Nate's article. You can find it. I can get the screen up. You can find it. Well, it's not cooperating, so I'll just tell you. You can find it on the Clearinghouse community. It's the witness in your pocket. It's at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. If you enjoyed today's content and this article and you'd like to be notified of future articles and events, please join our mailing list. That's at connect.povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. You can also find the Advocacy Exchange now as a podcast. You can take it with you. It's available on iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud. And I'd like to invite you to join us for next month's Advocacy Exchange. We're going to talk about the intersection of race, local political power, and affordable housing. My guest will be my colleague here at the Shriver Center, Kate Walls, and that will take place on Wednesday, October 24th, same time as today, 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific. And the link to register for that will be in the follow-up email you get early next week. I hope that you'll join us next month, and until then, remember that you're not alone out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you very much.